Let's bring in our next guest. He has been with us often to discuss immigration and the inaction on national security and border security. He's Michael Cutler, former INS officer, Skyping in from New York. Michael, this story is so big, I don't want it to get lost. I think we need to concentrate on this. Give us the breakdown. As I understand, 2 of the Turks are still imprisoned in the United States, but the other 2 are in Canada, and apparently this Justice Department is not attempting to have them sent back here.
Well, it was an issue of whether or not they were going to be prosecuted. They had them in custody. If the U.S. attorneys were going to prosecute them for unlawful entry, and they could have, then they would have made the proper move to get them indicted and take them into custody for the purposes of prosecution. Apparently, an immigration judge was the worst they faced, and they were excluded from the United States. They were set for hearing for exclusion. For whatever reason, the judge allowed them to continue on their merry way, which makes no sense. And then you have to wonder, if they were known terrorists, why the no-fly list didn't prevent them from apparently taking an airplane to get them up to Canada, presuming that's how they got there. And final point, this again calls into the spotlight something that I've been saying for the longest time. It's not just the border that the United States has with Mexico that should concern us. It is the northern border. It is the coastline of the United States and our seaports, and it's also the international airports. These are all parts of America's border, and yet most of the politicians, including Republicans, J.D., keep on talking about securing the southern border. You know, and I wrote an article for Front Page Magazine. I called it Border Security and the Immigration Colander. Think of how many holes there are in the system, how many ways of coming here, gaming the system, and yet everybody seems to be oblivious to it, with the exception of a couple of stalwart congressmen and senators.
I would compare it to Swiss cheese, but then I'm mindful of the fact that the Swiss actually control their borders, the holes in the cheese they make notwithstanding. You look back at this, and earlier this week on Capitol Hill, there was a public hearing. The Homeland Security Committee, Congressman Jason Chaffetz, grilling Homeland Security Secretary Jay Johnson on this entire episode, and the secretary sitting there blaming a U.S. immigration judge for the problem. Why doesn't Congress force someone in the executive branch to stand up and be held accountable?
I agree. Look, the judge, I don't know what was in the judge's brain. Maybe, he wasn't thinking right. I have no idea. But why weren't these people then prosecuted? Why was no appeal filed immediately to stop the judge from releasing them? You know, there is an appeals process that could have been invoked by the administration. So if you don't get the ruling you want, why not appeal the judge's decision as being reckless or contrary to national security? Wouldn't you think that that would be a reasonable course of action?
Only about a minute left in this segment.
Sure.
From all we have seen, in the parlance of the playground of bygone days, are we cruising for a bruising? This continued failure to deal with border security, is this just an open invitation for something terrible to happen?
Absolutely. You know, one of my nightmares is 9/11. I lived through it. 4.5 years before 9/11, I testified before a House Immigration Subcommittee on the dangers posed by visa fraud and immigration fraud. The Clinton administration ignored all of that. That's what set the stage for 9/11. When they keep saying the system is broken, look at all the terrorists who've since entered the United States after 9/11. Look at the Boston Marathon bombing. Look at the statements by ISIS. And I want those elected politicians to explain to the American people how they're looking out for the safety of our citizens and the security of the United States.
And it is a bipartisan failing. We can point that out. Michael Cutler, we're going to ask you to stay with us. We're going to step aside for a second. When we come back, the latest machinations on Capitol Hill dealing with the Obama amnesty. That's ahead on America's Forum.